Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Nice Podcast. Today we are going to discuss about Bangladesh turmoil. On 5th of August, uh, Sheikh Hasina of Bangladesh resigned and left the country following extensive and violent protest. The unrest began in July with the student demonstrations against the government job quota system, which later escalated into a broader anti-government movement. As protesters stormed her office residence in Dhaka, Hasina was evacuated by a military helicopter to India. Entering government is formed under Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus. It is in this context we have invited Professor Shahab Imam Khan, who is Executive Director at Bangladesh Center for Indo-Pacific Affairs, Dhaka. Professor Khan, welcome to Nice Podcast.
Thank
My
you very
first
much.
question is, can you explain the recent events in Bangladesh and the underlying reasons behind them?
This is a dramatic event. It's a once in a century sort of revolution, I would say. Many would say movement, many would say protest, but I would say essentially a revolution against three basic issues. One is, as you have mentioned, the quota, which was heavily linked with the public service, access to public service and government jobs. Which was heavily infected by a disproportionate number of quotas allocated for the families of great freedom fighters. Well, everybody appreciates freedom fighters and everybody holds them close to their heart. But the problem is that 30% reserved quota for them was way too much because by now most of the uh, freedom fighters are now old. I mean, it's most likely they won't be having their children who are within their 20s. So I think that was one of the grievances. Uh, well, they never said that you abolish the quota. They said that reform the quota. And it was hard like that they wanted the quota to be abolished. The government was very ineffective in terms of dealing with it politically. Instead, they resorted to what we call deceptive denial, in a sense that the court will do and court will come up with the solutions, and then they were buying the dates. But the students were very much concerned by saying that, well, the judiciary has always been blamed to be highly partisan. So that sort of perception was very much alive within the students. So they had a less confidence, and they said that, well, if the court gives it, then what? Whether the government will be wholeheartedly implementing it, and by then, those who are involved in the movement may get victim of police prosecution and so on. So that kind of fear was also there. So they didn't back out from their demand. And then suddenly we got to hear from the party leadership, top echelon, demeaning the movement, demeaning the spirit of the people, of the students. And when we mention jobs and students, it means the families are also linked with it, right? I mean, the families want their kids to be in the civil service and any other services. So this had a snowball effect, and eventually the general people came and joined them. And then the prime minister's office mishandled it, and then the former prime minister made a remark by saying that linking them with the Razakar, which is a very derogatory term in Bangladesh, which is essentially to mean those who collaborated with Pakistan back in 1971 against the independence. That erupted the students' sentiment. And then when the students really came out, the authorization for live bullets was the cardinal mistake for the government. Instead of going for political solution, dialogues with the students and then the teachers, because teachers are also protesting that time for their own demands related to pensions, separate payment schemes, salary schemes, and so on. So government really consulted with private sector, which is basically more about its what we call financial, and then media and everyone except for the students and the teachers. So they forgot probably to meet them. And that's the group mobilized and the people joined them. So the mobilization was astronomically high. This is one set of issue. The second set of issue, that the public were eventually very much worried about their future, because inflation was going high. The corruption reports are astronomically high. I mean, probably the scale that we have never heard of, amount of money that has been siphoned out, and then the misgovernance within the country was so rampant that created a kleptocratic structure. So people were very much worried about their financial future as well as their well-being because of the corruption. So that made the people to come and join the students. And the third group of people who were really aggrieved is the people who actually had some sense and sensibility left, which is basically political minds, by saying that these are happening because for many years we haven't had any kind of election. Now, when we don't have election, means we have created a governance system which is essentially a one-party uh, government, functionally one-party government, having another party as opposition, which is Jatiya Party, essentially functions on the basis of the directions or consultation with the government. So we literally didn't have that kind of functional government. So that sort of people also joined the movement by saying, well, this cannot go on like this. And the students demand, the public demand, and the political demand by saying that the election should happen so that check and balance and accountability can be restored. So the number of these people is so astronomically high, in which the other political parties also join. I mean, the government tries to give it a bad name by saying this is BNP and Jamaat led. Absolutely not. It was not at all a political movement. It was an apolitical movement in which these parties essentially joined. And then eventually, when BNP and Jamaat came, of course, they were also demanding protests or demanding election, and they've been denied of election for a long time. So therefore, they joined this particular movement, and altogether, it became so astronomically high and deep as a movement that it was not possible for the government to counter any longer. Now, the last mistake that the previous government did is that while they were negotiating with the private sector and its immediate neighbor India and so on, but uh, what has happened is by then the pressure of the public was so large that the law enforcement agencies were not adequate enough to crush it. In between, the student wing of Awami League, which is basically very notorious. And if you look at the newspapers in Bangladesh, if you Google, you will get to see that how notorious this particular student wing was. Also, all in rampage to crush the students. So altogether, the resistance was so astronomically high, it was not possible for the Awami League cabinet, Awami League students, and of course, Awami League patroned all these institutions, whether you call it police, special branch, RAB, to deal with it. So eventually, the military had to step in, and military step in and convince the prime minister to leave the country, because the mobilization of the students was so high that they would have eventually uh, cordoned off the prime minister's residence, and the result could have been catastrophic. So I think the military did the big favor to the former prime minister by giving her a safe exit, and did a fantastic favor to the nation, that the nation doesn't get swamped into further violence. So I think the role of the military was so astronomically appreciative that the entire world actually came and showed solidarity with the students as well as the military for its timely intervention.
Professor Khan, how do you emancipate, what do you emancipate would happen next in Bangladesh, and what direction do you think the country is heading?
I think we now have an interim government and formed by a very brilliant man. I mean, the globally recognized brilliant man, Nobel laureate Dr. Muhammad Yunus, and we are extremely proud of him. Uh, well, he is now the lead of the whole cabinet, interim cabinet, and interim cabinet largely has civil society representatives. I mean, you get to see Ambassador Tawheed dealing with foreign ministry, very capable person. General Sakhawat is dealing with home ministry, absolutely brilliant and has a high reputation within the military and the civil society, and of course among the students. And then you have Salauddin Ahmed, who was the former governor of Bangladesh Bank, who's an esteemed, highly recognized economist. Now, these are the people who are now taking care of the cabinet, among others. And the most fascinating story of this interim government, which I think is very encouraging for the youth, is two of the advisors were essentially full minister rank, are basically representatives of the students who were in the movement, right? So they have been given the task of a minister, who are basically between the age of 23 to 25, who has actually led the movement among few others. And they both are a part of the cabinet. And then the cabinet is not only supported by the military, but also by the entire student community in the country, which is astronomically a different story in global history of politics. A government which is being supported by the students is something that we have never seen. So the students are still on the street. They are managing the traffic system in Dhaka, because the moment former Prime Minister fell, police literally became dysfunctional because of fear that the backlash will come from the public, from the students, from all those who are aggrieved with police brutality, because we have more than 500 lives fallen during these 3 weeks of protest and movement, and that has never happened in Bangladesh's history after the 1971 Great Liberation War. So the students are also, I mean, if you look at Bangladesh's newspaper, students are also guarding every household, every localities. Every night we get to see that the pool of young people guarding houses from any kind of crime and criminal activities. These are the kids who are actually inspecting all the transports in the street to see if the cars are being transported for, the cars are being used for illegal equipments, or if somebody is siphoning out illegal money, which is astronomical. This is the job of the police. This is the job of the customs department. This is the job of the National Bureau of Revenue. These are the kids they are doing. And over the past few days, they have recovered so much of money, cash money, illegal money, and then illegal weapons and so on, is something that we haven't seen in our history. So, which means the students are now taking care of all the governance issues with the support of the government, for sure. Today, I was looking at the news where the students actually went to the hospitals to check whether they are actually charging the people high, or they are maintaining, and they took the media to see it, and media showed it, that they were able to literally find out that, well, the misgovernance in the hospital sector. So overall, what we have got to see, that the students are very much there. Now, with that situation, the interim government has three major challenges. The first challenge for the interim government is to create an atmosphere for inclusive, free, and fair election in the coming years. It is good that the interim government didn't specify how long, because the mess and the institutional perils are so high that it is going to take a time. Now, if they say that we are going to do it in 6 months or 1 year or 2 year or 3 year, I think that will be impractical. They can only tell it the moment they get some sort of clarity of how the institutions are being functioned. So therefore, this is their number one challenge. The second challenge is to control inflation and maintain the foreign exchange reserve. because Bangladesh, we have to understand that Bangladesh already had a very impressive infrastructure growth, but at the cost of astronomical financial burden. Now, that burden has to be eased off, because if we want to have much better economic future. So I think we have a brilliant advisor who will be looking into it. But the problem lies is that the institutions such as banking and those private sector who has siphoned out or who has bad debt are not going to be cooperative. In that case, only way you can do it is through law. And that's going to be time consuming issue. And many of them actually have fled away. So therefore, this is going to be a major challenge for them. And the third major challenge is the law and order situation. Because over the past 15 years, many of the institutions are heavily tilted or burdened with the partisan people. And you cannot just clean those institutions overnight. And we have seen in the case of Nepal, we have seen in the case of many other countries. So therefore, that is going to be very difficult, that the risk of sabotage, risk of dysfunctionality, risk of uh, non-cooperation discreetly is very much there. And I think that will be another challenge for the interim government.
Professor Khan, how do you perceive the role of global and regional powers in this context?
I
Specifically,
mean,
what position do you assign to India, China, and the US within this framework?
I think the current government will pursue a very balanced relationship between United States and China. I mean, the previous government, for the large years of time, focused on balancing between Beijing and Washington. Beijing being the key supplier and West being the key consumer, right? So we had to balance between these two. So therefore, that sort of relationship, what we call balancing act, was doing quite well for the country until the Prime Minister visited Delhi, former Prime Minister visited Delhi in the month of June, where the whole problem started with the giving the rail line to India and then allowing India to have a consulate, another consulate in Rangpur, and then giving operation right to India for Mongla port and so on, right? So if you look at that, Beijing would always see it as a strategic move in the case of alternative to chicken neck, right? So that sort of sentiment really made Beijing quite not very happy. And that was reflected in Global Times after the former Prime Minister visited Beijing within a few weeks of time of her visit to Delhi. Then the former Prime Minister was also playing with these two issues about Tista, because Tista River is a major issue between Bangladesh and India, among other 51 rivers. So what happened is that the Chinese gave a proposal to do the Tista management, and then Indians gave a proposal. So Prime Minister mentioned to the public, former Prime Minister mentioned to the public that, look, we have got two proposals, we will choose which one is good for us, but I will eventually take the India if India offers. Now, that sort of narratives really makes Beijing super confused, right? So that's the beginning of the end of Bangladesh's balancing relationship between Beijing and Delhi, and subsequently in the upper level, it is Beijing and Washington. But I will come to the Washington part later. So what happens is this is where the whole fiasco happened, and then our visit to Beijing was good, but not necessarily the best. The very simple reason is she needed money for the economy, because foreign exchange dwindling, budgetary support, and so, which was not met because of given the Bangladesh's economy. Beijing had a very fundamental response to that by saying that Bangladesh's statistics or the data or information provided by the central bank is not convincing. So therefore, it was very difficult for them to estimate what kind of financial support they would give to Bangladesh. As a result, they said, we will also form a technical committee, like the Indians formed a technical committee for this. That they said, we will form a technical committee for economic assistance, because legitimately that was very clear, because they were not having confidence on the state institutions and running of the state institutions, and whether more loans will be beneficial for Bangladesh in terms of uses of that money and then to repay of that money. So Beijing was very, I mean, in a sense, I would say it was helpful for the Bangladesh government or the people of Bangladesh that they don't get more burden of already huge amount of money that the government has borrowed from different sources. So Beijing is very important. For the current government, Beijing will still be very important because of infrastructure, financial stabilization, foreign exchange stabilization. Washington had a very eerie relationship with the government. And certainly, Washington raised the issues of multi-party election, human rights, violation of human rights, not from now, for a long time. And then they imposed sanctions on the elite security force called RAB, and the former police chief also was under sanction. Now, that was not really taken constructively by the previous government. Had they really responded in a constructive manner to that, I think the relationship with the United States in terms of political relationship would have improved. But economic relationship with the United States continued, because the United States still remains the top investor in the country. It is still the one of the key development assistance provider. It is the major supporter for the Rohingyas living in Cox's Bazar, 1.1 million refugees from Myanmar, and it is also a key ally in dealing or bringing accountability in Myanmar too. So therefore, United States had a very difficult relationship with Awami League in political ground, but it was having a very stable relationship in terms of economy, because that serves the 170 million people, which I'm sure Washington sees as the key determinants for stability and security in the region. Then comes India, for sure. I mean, the problem with the Indian foreign policy was that it invested heavily in Awami League and not in other political parties or the public. So therefore, when they remained silent when the student protests were happening, I mean, United States was very vocal. Chinese have issued statements. The Indians issued diplomatic statements. But being the very close ally of the former government, it didn't really strongly condemn the killings of the students. I mean, those who we consider as martyrs. And that has created a massive resentment, I would say, to the mass people. And mass people would eventually equate Awami League with the BJP in India. I'm saying BJP particularly over here. So if I read the students, if I read the public pulse, essentially their grievances with the India is not necessarily because India, but certainly AL being supported by BJP and BJP not necessarily providing enough condemnation for all these things that has happened in Bangladesh in a very open platform. And then subsequently, when Prime Minister Hasina, former, stepped down, she flew to Delhi, and which made put Delhi in a very difficult situation, because if they accept the former prime minister, then the students and the public perception will further solidify, which is not going to be in favor of India. And then if she's not given the refuge, we'll have a geopolitical risks too. In a sense, then the best friend of India was not given the support will be a lesson for all the political parties here too. So I think that dilemma really kept India in a backtrack, I mean, in back foot. So therefore, we got to see in Indian media from the next evening that it's all about minority attacks. And that's where the further irritation erupted. I mean, most of the Facebook posts, Twitters are coming from India. I mean, if you look at what's BBC Verify is a website is BBC's website that is the fact-checking website. Al Jazeera has a fact-checking, so they made a news story on that. BBC made a story on that. Deutsche Welle made a story on that, and Dismiss Lab also made a story of that by saying why the Indian media is essentially showing old footages and footages from different places and putting the blame on Bangladesh. Now, the phenomenal thing happened, of course. There is something called Hindu Mahajot in Bangladesh. It's Secretary General who has always been seen very pro Hindu, pro Hindutva, and very much in favor of BJP government. Came up and said, "Look, the attacks there were Hindus who were attacked, but they are essentially linked to Awami League, and 10 times more Muslims were attacked on the same manner that the Hindus were attacked." So therefore, this was not premeditated, it was not communal. So I'm quoting him. Then, of course, there is something called Hindu, Buddhist, Christian Unity Council, which gave a statement yesterday by saying that all the Hindu households that was victim of attack in Sylhet are all related to AL hierarchy. So the AL Muslims were attacked, so is the Hindu attack. So it was not that premeditated only because they are Hindus. Then there are the news came out today in Bangladesh media that many of the attackers who has been detained by the military and others are essentially non-Muslims. So altogether, we got to see in Indian media the hype up, and we assume that the fundamental reason behind it is to cover up probably that BJP's phenomenal relationship with Awami League didn't give enough dividend. And I was reading some articles in BBC where Indian scholars said that India should not give asylum to the former prime minister. And someone said that it will be a geopolitical risk for India if we give the refuge. Because she was in refuge in 1975, and the situation what prevailed in 1975 and now are not same. And someone, I mean, BBC quoted someone from former Indian diplomatic community said that she can go anywhere, but not as long as she doesn't choose India. So now you see that sort of hyper toxic dilemma continues to be there. And I think one of the reason was to divert the attention from the main reasons behind these movements. And the movements are very much similar to Indian socio-economic structure too. Highly polarized political narratives. You got the far right political narratives. You get to see Manipur and Northeast India, where you get to see that minority repression is quite large. If you look at the international media, then if you look at the Muslim persecution, CAA, Citizenship Amendment Act, National Registry of Citizenship, all these things essentially gives you a sense that minority relationship is not at the best. If you look at the US State Department's Religious Freedom Index 2023 or 2024, you're going to get the same picture, what I'm saying. Amnesty has mentioned it, Amnesty International reports, you look at that. And most importantly, if you look at the Global Press Index, India is behind Pakistan, which is, I'm quite sure, a self-explanatory statement. So what happens is that sort of disparity, narratives, religious toxicity, everything is very much resonating Bangladesh. And we won't be surprised to see that that sort of movement erupts in any other part of the subcontinent or perhaps South Asia. So we will not be surprised. So therefore, I think this is a very inspiring case. So if you label this movement with communal attention, then certainly a significant group of people will always be motivated. by not addressing the root causes, which is similar to many places in South Asia. And we also get to see that there is an issue of Bangladeshis taking the former prime minister to International Criminal Court. A petition has been submitted. I mean, I'm not sure whether it will get a fruition, but at least that sort of initiative has been taken. There is the case of what we call the International Crime Tribunals Bangladesh Act, which is being used by Awami League to prosecute those who were engaged in crimes against humanity. And that sort of laws can be used by minorities across the world to bring justice. And we have a precedence of taking Myanmar for persecuting Muslim Rohingyas, 1.1 million refugees here. The atrocities against Rohingyas, which UN mentioned as the textbook case of genocide to International Court of Justice. I mean, Gambia took it, OIC supported it, and certainly we gave enough support to the case. So, which is again another milestone. And then Argentina followed and took a case to International Criminal Court against Myanmar. So we are a classic example in the world where crimes against humanity, crimes against minority has been dealt with through legal processes as well as through other processes. And very fantastic thing when we got to hear that minorities are being attacked, immediately students, the Islamic groups, the public really came out and condemned, and they started to guard all the religious worship sites. It's not only the temples and pagodas, mind you, it's also the mosques, because we don't want to see that some sort of sabotage happens, that you get some sort of incidents within the mosque and then something erupts. We don't want to see. So again, you see that there is no discrimination as such. So if we are guarding the Hindu temples, we are guarding the Buddhist pagodas, we are guarding the Islamic mosques. So I think that harmony is very much prevailing. And I think that is going to be a role model in the coming years.
Professor Khan, thank you so much. Let me move to the next question. What is your perspective on Sheikh Hasina's recent accusation that United States conspired to remove her from power for refusing to hand over Saint Martin Island? And what are the potential implications of this situation?
Uh, I mean, if you are a geopolitics student or geostrategic students, immediately we will be brushing it off by saying that Saint Martin really doesn't have enough geographical or topographical lucrativeness for any major power to come and dock there, because it is very close to Myanmar. You don't want them unnecessarily create a tussle with Myanmar if the Americans are docking there. And American ships or the submarines cannot come and dock there either, right? Because it's a coral island, it's a very shallow. So at best, it can be used as a forward base. I mean, you dock your ships in the sea and then you come and for your logistics and so on. And I don't think that the US or China or some other major powers will have enough money to waste and come and dock it over here. So I don't think that is the best answer, the best argument for Americans to come and occupy this particular land. So that's one. The second is, I think the former prime minister had a very strong conviction about the American role in during 1971, which is true. I mean, the United States was more siding with Pakistan and certainly was supporting the integration rather than disintegration. So which is part of our 1971 history, which is a part of the public discourse too. But that does not necessarily mean that the United States over the next decades really wanted to come and build a base in Bangladesh. So I think the partial sentiment is linked with 1971 And certainly there was a very strong narrative that was created within Awami League that United States always want to topple Awami League because uh, it wants to have much more stronger presence in Bangladesh. Well, if they want to have a stronger presence, they already did that with economics and social relationship. Look at how many students study in the United States, how many people have come back from United States. These are all social capital. I mean, so therefore, I think that superficial narrative has been created to divert public attention from each of the elections in which we have seen massive anomalies. And America, being United States, being the supporter of democracy and human rights, through its foreign policy, we may always debate it, but certainly their foreign policy dictates that they want to see democracy and human rights. And look at that. I mean, their suspect is actually now true. I mean, the human rights gross violation by killing the students was very much a classic case. Had there been a functional political institution, had there been a functional electoral institutions and a parliament, probably there would have been a check and balance. And even if there was a change in the government, that could have been done through political processes instead of all these processes that we have seen. So therefore, United States, I'm not saying that uh, the former prime minister's family or Awami League had reason not to be suspicious of the United States sticking to the past, 1971. But given the current scenarios, I don't think that this sort of narratives, particularly to deny human rights violation or electoral institutions or political institutions, really helped Awami League to continue its its power foothold in Bangladesh. So I am not very sure that if there is any kind of justification, valid justification, or rational reasoning behind this particular argument.
Professor Khan, let me move to the last question. What is your perspective on the interim government of Bangladesh and its future?
I think the interim government will continue to be here for some times as long as it has a practical agenda and works very efficiently to bring all the political actors to come and work for a better electoral environment. So that's where it has to work on, and certainly that is the major challenge. If they can address this challenge and if they can move forward with this challenge being addressed, I think they will be sustaining for a long time to come. But certainly they have to be very careful about externally motivated instability too. Because we also have to understand that Awami League was in power for 15 years and it has centralized power through bureaucracy, law enforcement agencies, judiciary. So fundamental changes have to come there, and these changes cannot come overnight. It takes time. And in between, anything can happen. So therefore, my understanding is if they're able to balance between their capabilities, their agenda, and the confidence of the public, then I think they're going to sustain for a long time.
Professor Khan, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.